This year, it seemed like they were maybe like 4 inches, really sweet red peppers with a nice fine spice to them. Nothing crazy. Like you can eat them just as is. And I like a lot of spice, so I wouldn't say everybody can do that, but I can just sit there and munch on them and they do not overwhelm me. It doesn't do that thing like a lot of sweet hots do, where like it's just the skin is sweet and the seeds are hot sort of thing. Like it is this, the heat is in the actual meat of the pepper, the flesh. And I really like that. It's become something really special, but kind of surprising because I wasn't necessarily saving to make it bigger and longer like that. It just kind of happened.
Welcome to episode 57 of the Seed Farmer Podcast, the podcast where I want you to harvest seeds from some of the vegetables and flowers growing in your farm or garden, and then to plant that seed out to grow delicious vegetables and beautiful flowers. If you enjoy the Seed Farmer Podcast and find it to be a good resource that helps you improve your seed work and farming, please support the show at spreadsheet.farm/support podcast. I'm your host, Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tourne-Sol Cooperative Farm and author of The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seeds. Today, we've got a conversation about seed opportunities on market farms. But first, news. Actually, I don't have a ton of news to share right now. I'm recording this a few weeks before release date because Emily and I are about to head out to Oregon for the OSU Small Farms Conference where I'm talking about crop planting and collaborative farming. We're also hoping to visit some seedy friends out there and maybe go to the coast. I would tell you come and see me at the conference, but by the time you hear this, I'll have been back. So anyway, hope I did see you if you were there. And when this comes out in March, the Tourne-Sol team will probably be starting up the greenhouse and seeding thousands and thousands of onion seeds. So that's what I expect to be happening at this point. And now let's get into today's conversation. Jesse Frost is this episode's guest. Jesse operates Rough Draft Farm in Kentucky with his wife, Hannah Crabtree. Jesse is also the author of the Living Soil Handbook and hosts the No-Till Growers podcast. As a writer and farmer, Jesse approaches plant breeding as a creative process, a rough draft, shaped by the unique terroir of his land. In this episode, Jesse shares how he moved past the seed intimidation of his early years to a more integrated approach, now simply looking for seed opportunities within his existing market rotations. We discuss the evolution of the topper popper pepper, a project that actually began at Tourne-Sol, where I farm, and that Jesse refined on his farm. Jesse gets into how to find the capacity for seed work without sacrificing production and being patient with your farm's evolution, and how all you need is a pocket full of rubber bands to become a plant breeder. In the deep dive, Jesse and I get into sweet potatoes, how to harvest them, how to cure them, and how to propagate them as slips without scurf. Hey, Jesse, welcome to the Seed Farmer Podcast.
So great to be here, Dan. Very excited to have this conversation.
I've had a lot of conversations with you over the years on podcasts, but today I get to ask the questions, so we'll see how that goes.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Why don't we just jump into your seed story?
Yeah. It's interesting. My seed story started the day that I interviewed to take my first apprenticeship. And what it really was, I didn't know it then really, but in retrospect, basically I was apprenticing on a farm or applying to apprentice on a farm in Southern Kentucky called Bug Tussle. My mentor, Eric Smith, and his wife, Cher, they're both brilliant growers, off-grid, very interesting farm, biodynamic growers. They, do rotational grazing and all sorts of stuff. It was very, very cool farm. I got a lot of interesting experience there. But the very first thing you do is you kind of go and you interview and you talk with them and you basically spend the day there in the middle of the winter and you work with them and then you stay overnight and you kind of have breakfast and all that stuff. And I remember at dinner, the dinner that night, the very first night I was there, was sweet potatoes, kimchi that they'd made, and some sausage that they had from a neighbor, I think, or maybe that was their own sausage. I can't remember. But it was just super simple. And I remember that sweet potato was one of the most unbelievable flavors I've ever had. Like I don't know, growing up in the South-ish of the United States, like sweet potatoes is a thing. I live here in Kentucky, and sweet potatoes is a thing, but usually it's like slathered in marshmallows and honey and just sweet. They add the sweetness, right? There was the sweetness in the sweet potato, and they're usually kind of starchy. And I don't know, that was kind of like meh. I like them okay. But this was a like life-changing experience. I remember tasting that sweet potato and feeling like I'd never had any food, let alone a sweet potato that tasted that good. And so it kind of started there. But then a, a few months later, curiosity, right? Like why is the sweet potato so much better? And the story behind it was,
Can I just ask?
yeah,
Is this like an orange fleshed sweet potato, or did it look different than what people think of as a sweet potato when they're imagining it? What we see commonly?
yeah, it was a little bit different. It's a little bit more of an orange flesh. It's actually called the golden nugget because it's got, that's the name of the variety, and it's got like a kind of a golden yellowy flesh. Nothing doesn't stand out. It's not like one of the shocking like purple whatever sweet potatoes or one of the albinos or anything like that. It's really just kind of an ordinary looking sweet potato. And the story was that they got that from a neighbor who'd got his sweet potatoes from somebody who'd grown them in their family for over 100 years. So in that area, they'd been growing them for over 100 years. And where that really came into focus for me was the next fall. Like I'd spent that whole year interning with them. I got the job, obviously, the apprenticeship. So I spent the whole year sort of apprenticing with them. And then at the end of that year, in the fall, when we harvest our sweet potatoes, everybody cures them. I went over to visit a mentor that I'd kind of made, a friend that I'd made over that summer, named the Barefoot Farmer, Jeff Poppin. Really great guy, brilliant grower. And we went over to his farm and just had dinner, and we were hanging out with him one night. It was kind of cold. And he made sweet potatoes. And I tasted that sweet potato. And one of the fascinating, this was like really where it all came into focus, was it was the exact same variety that he had given to the Smiths years and years before. And he'd been growing it for a really long time. And they couldn't be more different. Equally good, but couldn't be more different. And this farm is not but 15 minutes away from Bug Tussle. Like these two farms are really close together. But something about the soil, the way that he grew it, how he cured it, something just like those nuances of how much of a signature that sweet potato was of each of those farms really fascinated me. And even still, like when we would go back and taste our neighbors, our mentors' sweet potatoes from our own, we're still growing that same sweet potato. It's still different. Like they're all the different unique signatures that a place can put on a seed. In this case, a root. But that's kind of where it started for me. I was like, this seems really special. Just as they call it in wine, like the terroir. Just it really speaks in food in a way that I hadn't realized before.
So I'm assuming that these potatoes were propagated by tuber as opposed to by seed. Just kind of clarify that for the listeners.
Correct. Yeah, we don't grow sweet potatoes from seed. So that is a good clarification because I'm sort of lumping it in there with seed because it is like it's the start of a plant. But and it's also, sweet potatoes are not tubers. They're actually roots. They are, they don't have like that stop point, right? Isn't that correct? Am I wrong on that, Dan?
I think you're right. There's a difference between like a stem tuber and roots, but you are right. Yeah.
Because the thing with sweet potatoes is unlike a tuber, they will grow indefinitely. Like you could, if you in the right season, they're a weed, like a problem in tropical areas because they just won't stop. And for us, like they would grow basically indefinitely, but we obviously get a frost here around mid-October. So they'll grow from we plant them usually in May, and then we'll talk maybe a little bit about that later, but plant them early and then they die, and you have to harvest them before they get too hard frost or they'll rot.
And we're going to get back into sweet potatoes when we get into the deep dive part of the episode, just to leave our listeners hanging. In your apprenticeship or when you were working on other farms, did you come upon other types of seed saving also?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things like that, I think it was that very first year, because I did 2 years of apprenticing. And I think it was that very first year that I started doing, like really focusing in on saving tomato seeds. I really got fascinated by this idea of, I was into fermentation anyway. I came from the wine industry. I really, really loved all things fermentation. I was really fascinated by it. And so when I started to learn about the sort of applications of fermentation in seed saving, in particular with tomatoes, I got really interested in that. And I think as much for just like fermenting the seed pulp and getting the seeds out as anything else. But I got interested in seeing all these different heirloom seeds, these different heirloom varieties from people all over, that area. And this really, really, that area was like an hour from anything. So you had all these gardeners who've been growing a lot of these heirloom seeds for a long time. They all had their family bean seed. They all had their, family tomato seeds and stuff. And I got really interested in saving some of those seeds. I didn't really keep the tomato seeds up for very long just because I don't know. I didn't have the organization at the time to really keep track of them. And we didn't have a farm. Like I didn't have a farm until several years later. So I just kind of had all these seeds and I don't know, they just didn't, there wasn't much to do with them. But I got really interested in that idea and I loved just the unique qualities. I loved that idea of having your own family seed. Like we had our neighbors, the Holders, they had the Holder bean and we grew out the Holder bean for them a couple times. And then they just stored it in their freezer and they'd grow it every year and all. And I thought that was really neat. And you learn that that's kind of a big Appalachia thing. There are lots of, families in Appalachia that have their own bean seed. And you have these like sort of seed collectors that live in the area who will go and visit those farmers and those gardeners and pick up those, try and keep those family bean seeds going, which I thought was really neat.
Yeah, because it's easy for that to disappear if there's a break in interest in the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it and just in the same way that like I didn't have anything to do with those tomato seeds, is a lot of these people, if they don't have anybody that's going to take over their family gardening, or the family farm or whatever, and they end up selling or moving or whatever, a lot of that stuff dies out. And it's really kind of sad because with that goes a lot of diversity. And it's amazing how diverse they are. Like all of these, you'd think like all the bean seeds are, they're just all kind of black beans or whatever they are. But no, there's an incredible amount of diversity within the beans that people would grow for their families. And I thought that was really fascinating.
So let's fast forward, and why don't you tell us what your farm looks like these days and how seed fits into that work? And like what other non-seed work you do also, I guess.
Sure. So we have a farm here in central Kentucky. We are, if anyone is familiar, right, obviously we're in the United States. We're in the middle of the state of Kentucky, and it's known mostly for horses. We're kind of right on the outskirts of horse country. Like our neighboring county to the south is where all the famous horses come from for the Kentucky Derby. We're in between Lexington and Louisville. That's like Louisville is where the Kentucky Derby is run. Lexington is where Keeneland is. We're like deep in the heart of horse country. And with that, it's it's a really interesting area because it's a lot of rolling hills. There's almost no flat land. And our farm is that. Like I always call it, like what is it? Like a slalom course, like a mogul's course rather. That's kind of what our farm looks like. It's just very moundy and it's hilly and it's got a good amount of slope to it. So it's kind of a difficult place to grow in that way, heavy clay. But we've got a lot of limestone in the soil, right? That's one of the things that makes bourbon. We're also in the middle of the Bourbon Trail. That's also one of the things that makes it special is the limestone water. So that's our kind of location. We're pretty hot. We're 6B is our zone, but we get pretty hot in the summer and pretty cold in the winter. And our farm is about right now in production. I think we're down to less than half an acre that's actually in production, but a lot of our full acre that can be in production is kind of transitioning more to perennials, trees and shrubs and those sorts of things. Largely because I'm pulling back a little bit, just energy capacity wise, and we're not doing the farmers market anymore. So we can do things on a little bit of a smaller scale. And we sell mostly to restaurants, do some wholesale, and do some, like retail, sell to a retailer. And our farm we've been certified organic for most of its life, but once we dropped the farmers market, we stopped certifying. It wasn't a necessity for us selling to restaurants and stuff. So we dropped the certification, and I also kind of, it's just another thing that I didn't really want to keep up with. And the audits would take up a whole day. And I was kind of like, you know what? I don't really need that. I'm fine with organic certification, no issues with it. We were certified for years, and if we ever went back to the farmers market, we would recertify, because that to me is where you get the most value out of it. Or potentially, if we decide to sell seeds, like that would be another area where we would also recertify, because it wouldn't be that hard. We still keep up with it, but Yeah, we're mostly vegetables. We sell, like everything from our primary crop for a lot of growers on our scale is like a lot of growers on our scale is lettuce. But we sell cherry tomatoes. We do a lot of, like just kind of smaller crops, lettuces, or sorry, carrots, radishes, arugula, some of the slightly higher profit stuff. But I tinker a lot. Like I love to play. For me, I'm like, I don't see the point of having all this land without enjoying it a little bit and, growing some stuff that I don't necessarily make the best living on. So those are the ones that mostly pay the bills. But then we also like, I've been trying to develop a milpa patch. That's, or the Three Sisters patch. And that's not because I have any indigenous roots. I do not here in the United States. I do it because I get a lot of questions about it. And sometimes from indigenous growers who want to understand, like they've been moved to a new area and they kind of want to understand their soil and what they could do. And I didn't have any experience with it. So I've started developing that a little bit just to have that insight. That has been really lovely. I've really enjoyed, I love growing in diverse patches like that. And this year we had corn, beans, sunflower, and it was popcorn, pole beans. Sorry, I should be more specific. Sunflowers and winter squashes all kind of growing together. And it was just so lush and vibrant. And I loved that. And so I'm going to keep doing that. And I've done that sort of polyculture stuff in a lot of different ways, but having a little bit more intention to it there. And so I'll do things like that. I love growing watermelons. Worthless crop in terms of profitability, but just delicious. I love growing watermelons. Um, and especially on our scale, if you're doing it on a larger scale and you're mechanized, you could probably make some money on it. But if you're doing it all by hand, you're not going to make any money. But it's great. And I juice it, and I'm drinking watermelon juice this week. So that's, in the middle of the winter, it's a nice treat. And yeah, I mean, that kind of is the rundown. I feel like I could go on and on probably, but
How many crops are you keeping seed from on this farm?
that's a good question. So most of the milpa crops, so that's four right there, except for the winter squash. I'm going to kind of switch that up. I didn't feel like I liked how that went last year. I'm going to switch it up we kind of did pumpkins and honey nuts, and I think I'm just going to go straight to honey nuts and just kind of stick with that. So I'll start saving all the seeds on those. And then we do sweet potatoes, garlic, okra, peppers. I've stopped on tomatoes just because I'm kind of happy with my mix that I get and I mostly grow cherry tomatoes. And let me think. I've been doing some herbs, some cilantro, and those sorts of things. And I don't do any of the stuff that I probably produce the most of, like lettuce. That is kind of I'd like to do that, but the challenge with that is I grow so much, I really need it to be pelletized, and I don't see a way of doing that feasibly on my own. I know that there are some ways to do it, but I haven't gotten that far, I guess is the answer there.
You're not the first person I've heard with that challenge. It makes a big difference when you're trying to do any kind of scale to have it be convenient for you.
Yeah, I mean, we're planting thousands of lettuce a week, and it's just, seeding or like seeding at least 1,000 lettuce a week. And it's just like, I mean, I can't do that with the little seeds there.
So I think this is a bit of a broad question. I was going to ask, what does seed work look like on your farm? But I guess what I'm meaning is, like, how intentional are you in when you're keeping seed? Is it something that you're just doing at the end of a day, you kind of like in stolen moments, or is it part of your planning for the season?
Oh, that's a good question. It's increasingly part of our planning for the season. There are certain crops that, beyond just harvesting them, are part of the plan for that crop, if that makes sense. So, let me think of a good example. I mean, okra is an easy one. Like I've said this before, but like you're just going to miss some pods, so that going in, or maybe you just choose a few that you want to miss and let them get big, and you can save that seed. That's like an easy one. So I know that's going to happen every season. And then I can wait till the end of the season to process it. There's no it's super low stress. Other crops, maybe more like, I'm trying to think if there's one that's difficult, because a lot of the crops that I save are sort of intuitive, because it's just a matter of letting them go a little bit longer, missing a few of the harvest, letting them go a little bit longer and harvesting them. Maybe one would be like, I used to save kale seed a fair amount. I've stopped doing that, and I don't really know why. I just don't grow a lot of kale, so I don't think about it that much. But that's like an easy one too, that I could let go over the winter. and then it will flower in the spring. And then I just wait till those pods are ready, and then I harvest them. So that's one that I, probably would have to have a little bit more intention behind, only because it's taking up spring space, going into the summer. And I expect to have to save garlic. Like, all of those things are kind of built into the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I do hear that your systems have evolved so that the things that are easy to keep the seed from, you're just doing. And other things depends on maybe on the scale of whether you need, like if you were growing tons of kale, maybe that would be more of a prompt for you to hold more of it back.
Yeah. And some of it too, I think the holdup with lettuce is twofold, right? Like, that's the one that I feel like beyond, even if I'm not worrying about the pelletized part of it, if I just want to save the lettuce seed, we're in a really humid climate, so lettuce can be difficult. I'd have to set aside tunnel space really to effectively, reliably do it, because in the summer, I mean, last year we got 60 plus inches of rain. Like, it's too much, and you never know when it's going to come, and it'll stop for a while, and then it'll rain 4 inches in a week or in a day, and so we just never really, I don't know. It's hard to do some of those things outdoors. The ones that I've kind of gravitated towards are the simpler ones, but also the ones that just make more sense for our climate. So lettuce is a tough one, because that's the one that I want to save the seed the most. I really, really want to develop, heat hardy lettuces. Like, that's a dream of mine, to develop more heat hardy lettuces. But the challenge with that is just like, I would have to have that seed area out of production for long enough inside of a tunnel. And I don't know, it's been hard for me to find the time or space to justify that. But increasingly, and I think this maybe it answers part of your question too, about how this has kind of come to be, is as we've pulled back from the farmer's market and I've focused more on other things that I do, like the podcast, which we can talk about later. The other things I do, I'm not as reliant on every single thing being a production item. That gives me a little bit more flexibility to experiment and try some of these other passions that I have, because I love the creativity of seed saving. I love, you have this idea, I think about, like, with you all in the black radish with the watermelon. Like, that is the cool. When I saw that, it was like, my mind was blown. I was just like, this is art, right? Like, there's this really cool collaborative art that you can do with seed saving and in terms of, like, working with nature. And I was like, that is, that's very cool to me. And that's a passion that I'm increasingly finding capacity to fulfill.
Why don't we talk about some of the crops that you're growing for seed? One of the ones that's definitely on top of my mind is your topper popper. Why don't you tell us about the topper popper?
Yeah, I kind of feel like that story begins with you, though, Dan, because, like, so this is a pepper that I've been growing for a while, that I got the original seed from Dan, and I'm going to make him kind of give some of the background on this. But maybe we'll just start there. Dan, why don't you give the background of this pepper, and then I'll talk about what I've done since I got it.
All right. Well, there are different species of hot peppers. And there's like the capsicum chidense, which is like the habanero, Scotch bonnets, and a bunch of others. And then there's the annuums, which is like jalapenos, chilies, and others. And generally, when things are two different species, they don't cross together. In my experience, peppers do cross together. And I got some chance crossing between some Scotch bonnets and some kind of red annuum. I'm not sure exactly which one, because there was a number of others in the same area. And I had kept the seed. I was kind of excited about it. And I grew it out. And there was so much diversity. And I think, so the first time that we met in person, you'd come to my farm, I don't know, it was like 2019. I don't know if it was early. It was around then.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think when you showed up, I was in the middle. I had like 100 of these plants that I was pulling out of the ground, tasting the fruit to see if it was spicy or not, and looking at them. When I had found an accidental cross in the Scotch bonnets, that would have been an F1 generation that I found. Like, that would have been the hybrid. And I kept the seed from that F1 and I grew it out, and that'd be the F2. And so what you came and saw was the F2 seed. And there was so much different diversity in shape. The colors were pretty much yellow or red, or maybe like orange and red. There wasn't as much diversity in color, but the shape was all over the place. And then the flavor was all over the place, and the heat was all over the place. And I stayed with this project for about 2 or 3 years. And initially, there were some that I really, really liked. There was one that was like, it was the sweetest hot pepper I'd ever tasted. And one of the reasons caught my attention is that almost every fruit had been nibbled on by mice. Like it was, the rest of the peppers weren't like that. There was definitely some extra attention, but there was next to no seed in those. And there was only a couple seed. And then the next year when I grew it out, like there was no seed. So like I lost that, like that variety just didn't, I couldn't propagate it. And then some of the other selections I did, I found after 2 or 3 years, they weren't as interesting. A lot of them got really mild. And I don't know if it's kind of that interspecies cross that was hard to kind of stabilize something good with. I don't know if I just didn't choose the best ones initially, or the best ones initially didn't have seed. But so I was calling out my Scotch Bonnet Remix. I spent a lot of time with it for a few years, and ultimately I've left it. But what excites me is that when you were there, you were also tasting some of them, and you chose one that you liked, and you brought it home. And maybe I should hand this over to you at this point.
Yeah, so my recollection of that was we tasted a few. I mean, I remember tasting like maybe 5 or so peppers, and they were all spicy. The ones that I tasted that I can remember. And the one that I took home was like, I remember it having sort of like a heart shape, a little bit smaller. It was a red pepper, and it had a nice sweetness to it. And I was like, this is cool. I'm going to take this home and see what I can do with it. And so I started in the first year. That's kind of what I got, was like these kind of bright red, or dark red. Like they looked like a top, like a spinning top. So I was kind of like, oh, that's where the topper popper came from. And also the top of it popped off really easy. That's where topper popper came from, because I was making hot sauce with it. And so anyway, yeah, I was like, okay, this is cool. And I grew it out another year, and it got a little bigger. And it just like every fruit on the plant was just a little bigger and a little less spicy. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I've kind of kept doing that. And now what I have is probably, I don't know, this year it seemed like they were maybe like 4 inches, really sweet red peppers with a nice fine spice to them. Nothing crazy. Like you can eat them just as is. And I like a lot of spice, so I wouldn't say everybody can do that, but I can just sit there and munch on them, and they do not overwhelm me. There's not it doesn't do that thing like a lot of sweet hots do, where like it's just the skin is sweet and the seeds are hot sort of thing. Like it is the heat is in the actual meat of the pepper, the flesh. And I really like that. It's become something really special, but kind of surprising, because I wasn't necessarily saving to make it bigger and longer like that. It just kind of happened. And also, like, there were a couple times where I like lost track of the seed. One time it got wet, like I left it out and it got wet and some of it got ruined. So I had to kind of pick a lesser pepper off that plant that I wanted, or off of a plant that was like not as good, just because it was ripe and it was like November or something. So I had to just take something. And so, yeah, I think that some combination of those things where I screwed up both somewhere along the way, it's now this really interesting pepper. And so, yeah, I'm going to keep growing it this year and just see where we're at. But I think like if I can stabilize it there, that's kind of my dream pepper. I love nothing more than eating a sweet pepper, walking through the field. And if it can have a little spice to it, that's just like, it's my dream. It's my dream pepper.
That sounds delicious. It is interesting hearing you explain the evolution of the pepper, because it does mirror a little bit what I experienced. And I think I wound up with something a little not spicy enough to find interesting, and maybe not sweet enough to replace like another sweet pepper. I'm wondering, did I give up too early? I don't know. But it does sound exciting that you do have this variety that's gotten its own personality over time on your farm.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan. I don't know how it's viewed in the seed world, but I love the Carmen sweet pepper. Like that flavor, especially when it's a good ripe sweet pepper right in the middle of the summer. I could eat those all day long. I come in with like my mouth red from eating those peppers. And this is that for me. It's a little bit smaller, but the sweetness is really lovely. And I don't know, I'll have to get you some of that seed so that you can try it out and tell me what you think. You can maybe get it back to where you wanted it.
Well, that'd be awesome. And yeah, Carmen is a phenomenal pepper. It's a hybrid, so you can't keep it. Well, I think some people have actually kept a little bit, but I'm not going to get into that. But it is a fantastic pepper. So those are high praises. Now, you mentioned keeping okra seed. And before we started this conversation, before we pushed record, you mentioned you've been keeping okra for a long time, but you felt that recently it's lost some of the qualities it had that you liked about it. And I wondered if you could tell us about your okra journey and how it's evolved.
Yeah. So I love okra. I love it as a crop. I'll eat it raw in the field. I love cooking with it. It adds so much flavor to everything. And I think it's a beautiful plant, right? Like it's a really, really lovely plant to have around. And I, started harvesting okra when I was like interning and hated it. Just brutal crop to harvest. And anybody that's harvested okra will be able to tell you that. So I tried a few different varieties later on, like when we started our own farm, maybe even the second year of apprenticing, we got a burgundy okra, and that was great. And the spines weren't as brutal on the skin, and I could mostly harvest it, without too much trouble. So I started just saving seed on that. But I started to realize like it just got too tall too fast, and it wasn't like, it was too hard to harvest, and I had to stop harvesting it without in like June or July, or no, July. And I wanted to keep going all the way through August and into September, even though I have noticed that they get more protective, they get more spiny the later in the season okra gets. I don't know what that's about. I assume it's just like protecting itself more because now it needs to really save its progeny. But anyway, at that time, I was kind of like really wanting to grow more okra because I was realizing like it's not super hard to grow. It will grow in any conditions. It could be hot, it could be cold, whatever in the middle of the summer. It could be a wet summer, dry summer, doesn't matter. Okra is like good to go. And so I was really loving that about okra because it meant that we always had this one unique item that no matter how everything else was doing, it was like good. And so what I wanted to do though was make it bushier rather than taller. And I started to just select the pods off the bushier okra plants. And I started to get this really nice bushy okra that was not getting as tall as fast. Any of the ones that went tall fast, I would just get rid of it. I culled those plants. And so I just started keeping all the bushy ones. And basically like that was effective for several years. And then as we started to pull back from the farmer's market, I just wasn't giving as much energy to the okra. And I started to notice that I was just kind of saving whatever okra seed was left at the end of the season. And some of the plants are okay, but some of them are like, yeah, we're back to the tall stage. And they're just kind of like, a couple of them are, they just don't grow as fast. They're like extra stubby. And I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what I was doing there. I think I had a good system for it when I was selecting for what I liked about each plant. And also just like I was selecting plants that weren't getting that extreme spininess there at the end of the season, which you could almost see on the actual okra plant. And I was kind of selecting for that a little bit too. But like, I don't know, for the last 2 years, having neglected it, I feel like it's inconsistent now. It doesn't have the same, vibe like that it was having there for a while. So, it's kind of a disappointing situation there, but I think I can reclaim it. It's been one of those things I've noticed.
I love the story for a lot of different levels, but it's really great how having an active relationship with it lets you really see the plant in a different way than when you were spending less time with it. And I guess it's a double-edged sword. When you keep seed, it adapts to your situation, and you can have a really positive impact in a few generations, and then things can change if you don't pay attention. But I still encourage people to keep seed, even if they can't put too much attention to it. Like, I don't think this is a story telling people not to keep seed. That's not what I want people to hear.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the beauty of it is like if you're willing to give it even a small amount of attention, right? Like it's not lost. The okra is fine. It's just whether or not I am going to pay any amount of attention to it next year and try and get it back to where it was. But in that case, especially with something like okra, it seems like a no-brainer. You're just walking through, even if you have a rubber band on your wrist and you can just hit the plants you like, or just put one around one of the pods that you like. And then you just don't think about it for months. And then you come back and you just pop that one off. And that's one of the ones you save. It can be super simple. And, maybe that's something we can talk about is just, I think that in the intimidation factor for growers, the capacity factor for market growers is without question, like to me, the biggest obstacle for standing between them and saving seed.
I'd love to talk about that. But before, I just want to highlight, so you just talked about having elastics on you. And I guess that's because as a farmer who bunches crops, you always have elastics on you. And that you then use that to they're not flagging in that case, but marking the individuals that you liked. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's just a really good example of using something that's on you at all times that you can then highlight the traits that you like at the moment that you're seeing them. Like I actually stash like flagging, like little flags in the field, though, so I have them close at hand. I can go grab a couple. But this is even better, I think, having the elastics on hand. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, that's funny. The other thing I've done, and I think you could probably do this in many different ways, is take a piece of grass and just tie it around it. And then you have this, and do maybe a couple so it's obvious, but like do a couple, a little bow right there, and then you can see it, and you just have dried grass, hanging there out in the spring, in the fall. And if you can, as long as it's not like a tiny piece of grass, you'd be able to find it. Like I'm talking more of like a tall, weed that you let get away, maybe
one of those that you can't pull out of the ground kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
So what are your thoughts about market gardeners being intimidated to get involved with seed?
Yeah, I think, for me, when it comes to like how I sort of started saving seed, I really, really wanted to do it. But as I got more into like, I have to make a living at this, that's where the majority of my energy went, is just focusing on like, how do I make a living growing food? And that's as it should be. But I think part of me always felt disappointed that I wasn't able to also save seed at the same time. What nobody ever really told me, I think, at that time was like, just be patient. Like you'll get there to the point that you have the capacity. Don't be disappointed in yourself now for not being able to do it. As long as you keep that as a goal that you'll, eventually get there, to that you can incorporate more of this into your business, into your life. And you'll find opportunities like with the okra or, like with the garlic, the sweet potatoes, these things that it isn't that hard. It doesn't even add anything to what you're doing. And you do most of the actual processing in the fall when you're looking for other stuff, reasons to get out of the house and, do something. Like it's there, and it's just waiting for you to find a little bit of capacity in the fall to do it. And I think that like just that aspect of like, it is so overwhelming in the beginning when you're starting a farm to even think about something like saving seed. And that's okay. That's kind of how starting any business is. It's just overwhelming for those first 5 to 10 years. It just is. And, and as you get better at it, and as you get better at like kind of, finding your balance, then you will find more capacity if you want it. And I think just never, what I would discourage people from doing is writing it out of your plan, right? Like don't write out seed saving of your plan. Just keep it rolling till the next year, and you'll eventually get to the point when you're like, oh, this is a crop I can save. Oh, this is a crop I can save. And you'll start making the time.
So I want to get into the deep dive and talk about sweet potatoes, but for many of the listeners, they might know you from other places. And I wonder if we should take a little moment to talk about how you have a life that is not just as a farmer, that you also have a podcast. Do you want to tell us a bit about No-Till Growers?
Yeah, so so Jackson Roulette and I started No-Till Growers in 2018. I started the podcast in 2018, and then 2019 is when No-Till Growers officially started. And we basically have since then, in some version or another, produced podcasts, videos, and done articles, all sorts of stuff. I often go to conferences, and we've done everything we can to kind of have this business model of making information free and open to anyone and everyone, and figuring out a way to make that financially viable for ourselves to do, which is a constant, just ever evolving challenge. But we we managed to. That's what we've done, and then that's how you and I got together and started talking, and you've been so generous with your time and given me so many of these sorts of interviews over the years, and I think that's kind of like one of the biggest things I have done or do. And then also I wrote a book called the Living Soil Handbook, so that's like another area where I don't know. I think just information, keeping it open so that somebody can use it if they want to use it. If they don't, if it doesn't hit them at the right time in their life or in their business, then that's fine too. It's just always there for them. I think that's a really important thing to do. So yeah, we've just we developed this model and have slowly made it work. And
So I'm going to kick a little bit of a tangent. Now, your farm is called Rough Draft Farm, and you kind of moved into podcasting and you've written a book. What is your creative background? Or like, have you always wanted to be a writer, or is this a space that you thought you'd wind up in?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting you picked up on that. So Rough Draft is like, a name that my wife and I came up with when we were apprentices. we knew that wanted to be that was going to be our farm name only because we were both artists. She's a painter. I'm a writer. And I've been a writer since I was in like 20 years old. That was always kind of my dream. I thought I would be, some sort of, I kind of thought I would be a fiction writer, and maybe one day I'll do some fiction. But generally speaking, I kind of fell in love with like journalism and that sort of thing. So I did that for a while. But I've always been a writer. I love writing. So Rough Draft made sense for us and actually became somewhat self-fulfilling in that we, were writers, but also like our first farm was a draft and we didn't stay there. And our second farm was a draft and we didn't stay there. And so now we're actually on our fifth farm. One of those we didn't fully start. So I hesitate to call it one of the five, but we are on our fifth and probably hopefully final farm so it kind of makes sense for us to be the Rough Draft. And then the other side of that, podcast listeners can listen to the episode I did with Eric Nordell. We did we always wanted to farm with horses too, and we never really got there. It was hard for us to find the educational time, but also like to learn how to farm that way. Also the space. We just, on our budget, we're never going to find enough land to make that make sense. And not anywhere where we knew we wanted to live. And so that was always going to be kind of the challenge for us. But yeah, that was like a dream too. And that's kind of why we put that in there. We were like, we'll also throw that in there just as like incentive or encouragement to get there. Now that doesn't really make sense for the types of crops we grow and how we grow and all those things. But that's the background of that name.
That's fantastic. I did listen to that Nordell episode. I've been a fan of their work for so long. It was really exciting to hear them because they don't do much of that type of stuff. I'd forgotten that there was the correlation also with the draft horse part in that name. Anything else that we should touch base on the podcast? I guess I should say that this podcast that we're listening to happened because, I think I was exchanging with Jackson Roulette through DMs about some Instagram posts from no-till growers. But ultimately it turned into like it was the Seed Grower podcast initially, or maybe Seed Growers, kind of came out of no-till growers. Jackson and you offered to host the podcast and to set me up with some equipment and then do the post-production work. And I'd always dreamed about, starting a podcast. I've been listening to podcasts for so long, but I never would have taken that step. Having you guys support the whole production part and back end, I just had to have conversations with people, and that I could do. So you really made it happen, and there's been an evolution since then. So like we're no longer under the no-till growers umbrella, but it wouldn't have happened without your support. So thank you for that.
Well, yeah. And that was a big part of our mission. We couldn't financially make it work, but that was like our goal was to start to be that for other growers, to be able to have somebody like you where all you have to do is focus on having a high level conversation with a high level grower. And we take care of all the nuanced stuff, all the back end stuff, because that's obviously like, that's intimidating. Where do you even start with starting a podcast? And we knew all that information. And we were like, let's do that part. And then they can just be themselves and have conversations that they want to have. And we dream of one day getting back to being able to do that. But yeah, it's a tough, like I said, it's an ever evolving world of content creation and how it's funded. And but I'm so glad to hear that. I love that you're continuing this podcast, and I'm clearly honored to be on it and that it's still going.
Well, thank you. If you're already a seed farmer, or even just thinking about harvesting seed from your plants for the first time, head over to seedgrowers.farm for my free seed grower resources. There is cross-pollination information, seed yield information, even a few seed spreadsheets. There's also a list of my favorite seed books and podcasts. While you're there, you can also sign up for my weekly newsletter to get seed grower tips and stories straight into your inbox. So head to seedgrowers.farm for my seed grower resources. Now, back to the show. Why don't we pivot to talk about sweet potatoes? Tell us why you chose sweet potatoes to go into a deep dive about seed saving.
Yeah, so I love, beyond just like the flavor of sweet potatoes, I love growing them, and I've grown them in many different ways. And I've learned a lot over the years. It's probably the crop that I've grown. I've grown lettuce the most, but in terms of annual crops, I've grown it the longest with garlic. Those are the two that I've grown the longest and saved seed, quote unquote seed on. And it's just it's a crop that I think is underrated, not just nutritionally. Like it's a really nutritious crop that people don't talk very much about. It's a really well adapted crop from you can grow it in the South all the way up into Canada. Um, and it is a crop that yields really, really well for what it is. And one of the things that for us, so basically like how we do our sweet potatoes is we harvest them in the fall. So we'll just start at the harvest. We harvest them in the fall. We cure them, usually in a greenhouse. We do that for about 2 weeks. Open greenhouse, it needs to stay around 80 degrees. You can use a heat mat or something if you want to, like, if you're not in a warmer climate, you can use a heat mat or something. You do want a good cure on them. Doesn't have to be fast. If you do it at that like 80-degree range, takes about 2 weeks. If you do it, as you get a little bit colder, it just takes a little bit longer. But generally speaking, we try and cure them relatively fast because we want to go in October with sweet potatoes to market and to our customers. But we want them to be sweet. If you don't cure them, they just are starchy and boring, and they're what people think about when they think of sweet potatoes oftentimes. So we don't do that. We don't sell them for 2 weeks after we harvest them. So our preference is usually to harvest them starting in the middle of September. We'll harvest a few baskets, or whatever, how many ever baskets we want to sell. And we'll do that every week until we get to like the main harvest, which is usually like mid-October, depending on when the frosts come. We always harvest before a frost. And then we cure them. And then those go into the kind of like as close to cellar temperature as we can over the winter time. We've got like an upstairs attic that stays pretty cool over the winter. So we'll keep them actually like our seed potatoes over the winter up there. And then in the spring, I've done this so many different ways now. I don't even know if there's one right way to do it. I don't think so. But basically, I take bulb crates and I line the bottom with a little bit of soil mix. I set the sweet potatoes on top. Soil mix on the bottom is probably not a necessity, but that's generally what I do. And then I put the sweet potatoes on the bottom. And then I layer either soil mix over top of that I'll later again just reuse later, or I'll put compost or whatever I have that I have in abundance. We've also done it with sand. It doesn't really matter. But basically, you put it in a warm space, like in our greenhouse. We kind of can just set them on the tables and they'll hang out there. We just keep it relatively watered. We make sure they don't dry out entirely, but they're really, really not finicky. And then you get from those from those roots, you get the shoots, the slips, as we call them. And once those slips pierce the soil, this is kind of where it gets interesting. What I did for years is I dug into the soil and I got the ones that had roots come, like whatever, the soil, the sand, whatever's on top of them. And I dug in and found the ones with the roots on them. And this is somewhat I've been finding out like semi-common knowledge from some sweet potato growers, but maybe not everybody. It certainly wasn't for us or the people that we grew that taught us how to grow sweet potatoes. But basically, we did that. We would go down into the soil. We'd cut the ones that had little root hairs coming off. We'd pull those out. We tried not to get the actual plant from the sweet potato itself. Like we didn't want to take any of the tissue with it. So we'd get those, we'd mud them, like we'd dip them in mud or compost mix, and then we'd plant those directly into the soil, usually in May, like after the last chance of frost.
Like straight in the field.
Straight into the field, yeah. So we'd take them from those trays straight into the field. We dip them, plant them kind of deep, just so they're not, we'd want to do this on a cloudy day preferably. And so that's kind of like what we've done for 15 years or whatever. And then I was talking to Jeff Poppin at the Acres Conference maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And he said that he was having trouble with scurf at one point, and we were having trouble with scurf. Now, scurf is like a fungal disease that sweet potatoes will get. And it was baffling to me because I'm like, my soil has never been better in these areas where I'm growing these sweet potatoes. I've never felt more confident in anything in the production, all those things. And yet the scurf just keeps getting worse. And so scurf, it just looks like this black fungus. It doesn't really affect it doesn't affect like storage necessarily. It doesn't really affect flavor, but it definitely affects like marketability. They just look rough. So I was talking to him about that and asking honestly if I could get new sweet potatoes. And he's like, you don't have to. Here's what you do. And basically I started those last few years, we've started to grow our sweet potatoes up. Same sort of process, but instead of digging down for those root hairs, we cut it right at the soil surface. So there's almost no root. And then we're planting that. Now I was incredibly incredulous when he told me to do that. I was like, these are going to fry in the field. There is no way this is going to work. And but it turns out that so I took it really, really cautiously. And I did that same thing. I dip it in I still dip it in a compost slurry because I dip everything in compost slurries just for the microbiology. But I dip it in like a compost slurry and then I put it in the field pretty deep. So you can see the leaves are still above the soil, but it's very, very close to the soil. And then I throw shade cloth over top of that just to and get them really well watered in, just to make sure like I'm not messing around at all. And what I found was that we are down to zero scurf. And that was like almost immediate. It was the very first harvest we had like a small percentage of scurf, and then we saved from non-scurf infected plants, and now we have none. And that was one of those like night and day realizations where I'm like, just that little thing where I was cutting it 2 or 3 inches deeper into that soil mix, the scurf was coming somehow from that, I don't know, transmitted somehow through that, maybe just crawling its way up through the soil or whatever, but just cutting right at the soil surface made a huge difference. So now I have, these big, beautiful roots that we can grow seed from and have no issues with. And that was like a game changer for saving sweet potatoes. And now that's like my biggest recommendation is just like, don't dig down, don't get those roots, just let them sprout and then cut them high. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the general rundown. Did I miss anything there?
How do you choose what roots you're going to keep for the next year? Do you do any kind of selection, or is it just what's left?
I have tried various things over the years. I'm like, all right, I'm going to select these nice, long, skinny ones. Doesn't matter. And then I'll be like, all right, I'm going to try some of these bigger, fatter ones and see if that results like has the opposite effect. Nope, doesn't matter. Just to me, I think something about the clone factor, like there's very little rhyme or reason to how that I can see. I mean, there's probably research that would indicate exactly how to do that, but we've not run into any situation where like what I saved for beyond the one thing though, I will say is we had a few that started to have this really, really beautiful, deep, like rubyish, like this deep ruby red color to them. So I started saving those and I'm getting more of that than I had before, but it isn't always consistent. So I don't know if that's a soil thing. It's unclear to me exactly. And I kind of like that. Like it's this interesting, sort of, I don't know, ornery root that I save on every year, and it kind of does what it wants to do. And, but yeah, consistently good flavor though, and consistent production too. And yeah, and that's the thing. Like we were talking earlier, if you leave sweet potatoes just to grow indefinitely, they just get bigger and bigger, and that has been a thing that we've worked on our timing with the sweet potatoes a lot, just not letting them get too big because there's a point at which you get these like rugby balls and they just, I don't know, some chefs like them, but they're almost unworkable. They're just so big and they're hard to cure because they're so big. So I've kind of, a lot of that the marketability side has to do with when I'm timing the harvest, less about like trying to maximize the yield, because there is a point at which they're just customers come and they're like, that's huge. What else you got?
For listeners, I want to kind of just elaborate on the fact that you mentioned that they're clones, and that's because you're keeping the same vegetative material year after year. They're genetically identical. Like if you take one sweet potato and you split it into 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, they're going to be clones of each other, so they're genetically identical. And so generally when you're selecting plants, for there to be a change or an improvement, there needs to be genetic diversity in it. And so like that's why cross-pollinating crops, they have a lot more selecting potential than like a self-pollinating crop. And like a clone, you'd have the least potential. But there can be chance mutations, and that might be what you've seen with that purple-ish color. And then there's also, I don't know a lot about it, but it's like kind of it's called epigenetics. Like there's some of the growing the year also has an influence. But maybe I'll leave that aside. But I just want to highlight that for the listeners.
Well, it's funny you said that though, because I have another story like that I kind of mentioned before we started talking about garlic. So I had some friends out in California who sent me some garlic seed, and the cloves, and so I planted them, and this was from like kind of mid-southern California. And so I planted those along with my music, which is mostly what we grow here, and a few other varieties, but mostly music. And it was unbelievable how bad it did. it just could not have done worse. And you look at it and you're like, I know I'm not growing my garlic wrong here because the music is thriving. Couldn't be happier. And then I'm looking at this garlic and it looks miserable. And so what we did was one variety died out completely, did not survive that winter. But the other variety had about, I don't know, 5% survival rate. So I took that 5% and I just saved it. And then I grew it out the next year. And then everything survived. It just wasn't super happy. And then I grew it out again last year and everything survived again. Not super happy, but mildly more happy than it was the year before. And I thought that was interesting because it makes me think like, even in a clone, there is there's these genetic responses that you can wake up in certain circumstances that you can ultimately select for that don't require cross-pollination, it's just like genetic responses to the situation. And I think sometimes maybe that's what we're seeing in our sweet potatoes, that they're putting out different size roots and all this stuff because to them, that's like a genetic response of like, this is survival to us, is we need all these different characteristics. So it's using all the genetics it has to work with and responding to the environment. And the same thing with the garlic is it's just like, okay, in order to survive here, we need these genetics triggered versus, like we have to deal with a lot more moisture, a lot colder temperatures for longer periods of time, that sort of stuff. So it's sort of working with that versus, what it was in California, which is perfect. It's like a giant greenhouse.
How is that garlic doing now?
Yeah, it's I've got some in the ground and it looks fine. I mean, it's cruising along. I mean, we're still got a few months before we'll know for sure, but it isn't. The interesting thing though is it isn't as pretty as the garlic that they sent me. Like the garlic that they sent was this beautiful red color, and when I harvest this garlic, it's just like, we made it, guys. It looks like, it looks like it survived a war. So hopefully it gets a little bit more of that beauty, that just like the vibrancy that it had. But flavor's good. And I'd be curious maybe in a few years to send them some of that back and just say like, give it a try, see what you think and see if it changed for you all, or if it's just like happy as all we get out to be back in California.
I mean, I've definitely heard that garlic has kind of, I guess, a memory of where it's been growing recently, and that it can take 3-4 years to adapt to a new area. And I don't know if this is that, but like we had a rough garlic year. So we've had some really big garlic. That's what we like to get. We big garlic. And we had a rough garlic year one winter, and we weren't able to get, like, the garlic was just smaller because of a combination of weeds and different tough stuff. And it felt like it took 4 or 5 years for it to get back to that previous size of like always selecting the biggest ones. And I don't know if it just learned from that tough year and then it was trying to be a little bit hardier for a couple of years until it felt it could be lush again. And this is totally anecdotal, but I've definitely heard that about garlic changing where it is. And I do think the soil makes a big difference, and that might have an impact on the color. Like in our soil, most years the garlic gets very white. Like even varieties that have a lot of purple or violet, they get much more white for us. And then someone else will grow our garlic and it'll wind up like much more purple on their farms. And I think that's something to do with the soil type that's doing that too.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, certainly it's sort of like the sweet potato example, right? Is that the soil where the crop is grown seems to, I mean, to some extent have some difference. And maybe even it's just like the day length at the time that you're harvesting it has a significant difference, or, who knows? Like it could be, there's so many different factors.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the whole reason for a terroir of different crops.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why don't we pivot into the wrap-up questions? And I'll start with one that you started to answer a bit before, but I'll ask it again. What would you tell your younger seed-growing self?
I love this question because it's kind of what I would tell my younger self about a lot of different farming things. Is I kind of wished I had spent some time on a seed production farm. And I also wish I'd spent some time on a farm that worked with horses. I also wish I'd spent some time on a farm that used irrigation, because like we only dry farmed in our apprenticeship. So that's all we knew. So when we moved to like biointensive farming, it was that was like a huge learning curve because I knew nothing. And I still feel like I don't know enough about irrigation. So it's just those things where it was like I was in a hurry And the same thing kind of goes with seed. Like I was in a hurry to start my own farm and underappreciating how much more education there was to have if I'd spent a little bit more time working with other growers. And I think like if I could go back in time, I would probably spend 2 or 3 more years just working for other people. And the opportunities that spin out of those situations are endless. Like you could meet a grower who wants to start a farm with you, or you could meet a customer who has a plot of land for you, or you could meet, or you just learn how to do a certain kind of farming that you hadn't even thought of, or learn tricks that come in handy down the line. I think, especially when you're younger, there's this huge rush to just get started and start your own thing and have your own farm and your own farm name. And I was like I said, Hannah and I named our farm before we even left our apprenticeship, right? So like there was never really, and both of us agree now that we should have left our apprenticeship and gone on to work on another farm. And yeah, I think that to me is like my biggest regret in that regard. Is just I missed on that. There's so much information that I could have had.
That really resonates with me, that advice. And that's something that I tell a lot of folks who work for us to slow down before they start pivoting to starting their own farm and stay with us. We'd love to have good employees, but if you're going to go somewhere, if you need to pivot, go work for somebody who's doing what you wish you could do. And you'll just be so much more ahead. There's so much to learn. Like if you're interested in cut flowers, go work on a farm with cut flowers. I spent a year not a year. I spent about 6 months working with draft horses. I had a similar inclination as you. And just before we started this farm, I thought if I don't work with them now, I'll never. Yeah, I definitely think it's really good advice.
Yeah, and I mean there's a culture too with farming that is kind of unique to the business in a way that people really are, ready to jump to that ownership element in a way that like people don't. I mean, people do it, but like if you want to be a great chef, you immediately go and study under the best chefs. But if you want to be a great farmer, a lot of people just go and be a great farmer. Like there's not that sort of stage incremental, you know what I mean? And that with farming. And I think it'd be nice to see that develop a little bit as a culture. Part of that though, too, is on farmers themselves. There may not be enough positions out there under certain farms to allow for, more stages and stuff. But I think I think that like that culture would, I think, help people. And that's what I would have wished I'd been, kind of come up into.
Definitely. What would you say to market growers to inspire them to start growing seed?
Yeah, I think I'd probably reiterate what I said a little bit earlier, just that, don't rush. Like, don't feel like you're missing out or you're not doing it if it's something you want to do. Just look for opportunities. As you get better and more efficient, you'll find time to do the things that you want to do. Focus on stabilizing the business, and then then go from there. I think that to me is a piece of advice I wish I'd heard, just because it's like it felt at the time, especially in those early years of starting our farm, like it just was like unreasonable to think that I could say it. Like I'm just like, oh, I can't do this. And now I'm like, oh, I just needed time. That's it. I just needed a chance to catch my breath.
Is there something that I should have asked you?
We didn't. The only other story that I thought was kind of interesting is I'm starting to try and save some onion seed because I found an opportunity with my strawberries. So I don't know how you would have known that or asked it, but last year I started. We had some candy onions that stored really well, and I was like, man, this is kind of what I want, right? Like I want a good sweet onion that stores really well. And it was all the way into, I want to say, February. And I was thinking like, in not the most amazing conditions, like we don't have great storage conditions for our onions. We just have like a walk-in cooler, and they were just happy. And I was like, okay, this is a crop that I'd like to keep going. So I took all of those and I just put the sets in with our strawberries, because we planted this one tunnel to a long strawberry to early glows, which take a full year to really get into production. And I was like, I need to use this space with something else. So that seemed to be the most sensible thing. Is I was like, I'm going to save these onion seeds and start using maybe this space as like as like a seed propagation area for certain things. So like this year, I'm going to do it in another tunnel. We switched to another tunnel with our strawberries for the next season. So what I'll do is I'll take those onions and put them in that tunnel this year, leave the leave the strawberry tunnel to do the strawberry thing. When the strawberries are done, then I'm thinking I may try to use that space for my lettuce production just to try. So it's just, I don't know. And that's kind of one thing that I'm experimenting with, is finding these gaps, this space in and around maybe perennials or semi-perennials, or long season crops, to do a little bit of seed saving where it's not in anybody's way. It's just kind of doing its thing. It's not affecting too much. Alliums grow great with strawberries. That's a classic pairing for lots of reasons. But yeah, that's kind of the one thing that I'm maybe would also say to market farmers, is beyond looking for time, is just looking for opportunities like that are just like, oh, well, what else is this space doing right now? But why shouldn't I grow a seed crop here, or a production crop, I guess? But like in that case, I don't want to rely on the space around my strawberries for a production crop. I'm happy to just let it do a seed crop. So before we got on this call, I was actually starting those onions today. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, good luck with that crop. How can people find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, if you look up no-tillgrowers.com, you can find information about us. We're on YouTube at No Till Growers. I do a daily podcast there called Growers Daily. And then the Living Soil Handbook is another really good, that's the book I wrote in 2021. And that's kind of a good outline of my sort of soil philosophies. Those are kind of the easiest ways. And then Rough Draft Farm is our farm.
Well, thank you, Jesse, for having this conversation with me. And it's fun to be on the other side of the conversation.
Oh, super fun to have this conversation. Dan, I always look forward to these. These are a blast to me.
Well, have a great season.
Thank you. Yeah, you too.
And that's episode 57 of the Seed Farmer Podcast. Thank you, Jesse, for being on the podcast, and thanks for all the support getting this podcast up and running. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you to Cepheus et Dalton for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at cepheusetdalton.com. Thank you to Molly Brisebois for editing this episode, and thank you so much for joining me in these conversations with seed farmers. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at seedgrowers.farm. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. You can also find out where to order a copy of my book, The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seed. And you can support the podcast at spreadsheet.farm/support podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, now's the time. You wouldn't want to miss the next episode. Until then, happy farming.